This is a Dynamics 365 podcast focusing on the ingredients of a successful Dynamics 365 practice. Your host is Business Solution MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as NZ365 Guy. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn by searching for NZ365 Guy, or if you want to engage my professional services, go to cloverbase.com. For more information on this interview, show notes, feedback and resources mentioned, or to suggest a guest for future episodes, please go to nz365guy.com/podcast. Thanks to Ingenious for sponsoring the Dynamics 365 Practice Podcast. Ingenious Connect Enterprise integrates your telephone system into Microsoft Dynamics 365 and CRM for increased phone agent productivity. The solution equips service desks and contact centers with features like screen pop, click to dial, automated call logging, and call reports for comprehensive view of interactions. Enable efficient customer service and intelligent decision making with Ingenious. Hi everyone, I'm here with Brock Sperryn, and in this episode we're going to be focusing on sales in the Dynamics practice. Brock's passion is to ensure that our world uses technology for good. He believes technology is an enabler for us living better and more meaningful lives. As we enter the fourth industrial revolution driven by customer experience, big data and artificial intelligence, he is enthusiastic about the opportunities in front of us. However, he also appreciates the gap between desire and reality is sometimes vast and overwhelming. It is therefore his quest to help organizations achieve digital transformation by establishing the platforms, cultures, leadership and agility to be successful. Brock, thanks for coming on the podcast.
I appreciate the opportunity to be part of it, Mark. It's something I think is a great initiative to share your thoughts and get inputs from all over the place. So yeah, appreciate being part of it.
Excellent. Brock, can you tell me a bit about your background in sales and how you ended up selling solutions based on Dynamics 365?
So I've been in sales for near on 4 years now. Before that, I was a consultant for 15 years, something along those lines. So I guess the transition to sales was probably a natural one because I got a lot involved in pre-sales a lot. I enjoyed that process, and I guess it was the next logical move in my career. Specifically when it comes to selling Dynamics 365, well, I guess my pedigree has always really been in the Microsoft space. It's interesting, you go through uni learning all about Linux and open source and Java and all that sort of stuff, and then you hit the real world and it's all about Microsoft. So I was going back maybe 10 years. I was actually an ERP consultant with Dynamics NAV and a little bit of AX. I then joined my current company, which is Empired, but at the time it was OBS. And OBS was really focusing quite heavily in the SharePoint space. But me and a cohort of people were pushing OBS really hard to start looking at this thing called Dynamics CRM and what it could do. So I guess that really sort of started the journey about being part of the Dynamics practice at OBS, which then became Empired. And now that I'm in sales and Empired is a 90% Microsoft focused organization, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, excellent. So you said you were in consulting for some period of time. What part of consulting did you specialize in?
Well, it started off as, just straight up programming, analyst programmer. Then I guess I wanted to get, more in line with the business, less about the technical side. So moved through a BA role, did a PM role for my sins and hated it. So really, I guess I was, I liked the concept of sort of solution architecture, and I know that word is bandied around quite a bit, but essentially it's taking a customer's problem and matching it to the right mix of technologies. I really enjoyed that, and the nice thing about being in sales is that ultimately that's what I still do. It's just it's a different role with different pressures.
Yeah, so true. So what do you get up to when you're not working? What gets you sparked up?
Well, what gets me up is my 2 kids. I've got two beautiful girls. One is 3 and one is 1.5. So they keep me very busy. So I guess what really gets me energized is just spending as much time with them as I can, trying to be adventurous, seeing their eyes light up. That's my passion. Between that and work, I love exercise. I play indoor soccer every Tuesday. I've got a bit of a home gym. I used to play golf and do triathlons, but 6 hours on a Saturday is not something you can do with two kids. So life changes. But yeah, that's really what gets me up.
Wow, excellent, excellent. So what was your starting version of Dynamics CRM?
It was version 4.
Version 4, yep.
Yeah. So yeah, it must have been back in 2008, 2009.
Yeah. Excellent. And so now, in your day-to-day role, what's your typical customer size or your target that you have the most experience with?
I found this a really interesting question when I read this before this session, because I actually think that gone are the days of actually picking a customer by size or certain metrics along those lines. I have customers that are no more than 30 people who are my best customers, right up to customers in the thousands. Basically, it's more the characteristics I look at, whether they see technology in the right light, whether they're ripe for their industry is ripe for disruption. There is executive support, board support, all of those types of things. That's really what I look for.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just that, Microsoft often uses a metric of size to quantify a customer because it comes down to the number of licenses sold. And I know we're encouraged to, if you like, go after the big whales as such, but a lot of our work can come from many other sized, if you like, customers that still potentially bring in a lot of work for us as consultants, but are quite different than, if you like, the targeting that Microsoft often focuses on.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's probably shifting a little bit in Microsoft's world toward, when they talk about consumption, because you can have a high consumption client that has very few staff. So I think that's a pretty big shift, and we saw that in Microsoft's recent sales org restructure. So I think things are starting to realign.
Yeah, and potentially Azure and the way it operates can really allow that, massive consumption for small organizations that are not just connected to CALs as such, right?
Yes, exactly.
Excellent. So how do you find selling business application software different to selling like a SQL Server, Exchange, that type of thing, for example?
Well, fortunately, I've never had to sit in front of a CFO and try and sell Exchange or SQL. I guess, business applications are generally focused on a certain departmental business problem. So I find that justifying ROI and attaching the solution to a corporate strategy or some kind of goal is a little bit easier, rather than just selling feature and functions of a technology.
Yeah. Interesting. So what's your typical characteristics that you come across of the type of customers that you're working with? Is it more on the IT or more on the business side? And is it more department level as opposed to organization wide?
So I'm having the most success when I'm talking to generally people at the GM or executive level with the blessing of IT. So that's just sort of the way I see it. Is I feel like sales is all about building a consensus and sitting in the middle and trying to join the dots on behalf of an organization to convince them to move forward on something. So, the characteristics I look for is obviously, like I mentioned before, an industry that is being disrupted, that's under some sort of competitive threat, that is undergoing a lot of change, and has technology as a key enabler or differentiator acknowledged at the exec, if not all the way up to the board level.
Yeah. So what are the nuances that come with this? As in particularly, like you said, with the blessing of IT, do you find that sometimes there can be a resistance from IT potentially losing control if the business are making more of the purchases that are potentially going to be IT-based solutions?
Yeah, I think that the differences are, I think there's a trend going on now where everybody within the organization understands that IT needs to be an asset to the business, an enabler. But that's not it's a scale from one customer to the next. So the nuances are really about what role IT actually has to play about helping me get the result versus being somebody who's an organization or a department that's dragged along.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so have you noticed any change in recent years in the way customers are acquiring Dynamics 365?
Probably more recently in the last year or so. Like, obviously, most people that listen to this podcast would understand that Dynamics 365 is now a suite that is made up of old AX, old CRM, plus a bunch of other things. Now, I think what Microsoft has done really well is sort of introduce the concept of the common data model and separate things out so that you can, for example, go and buy Dynamics for Talent discreetly without having to implement the whole ERP suite. So I think that's a really good move for Microsoft. It means that your customers don't have to go down the big behemoth sort of large-scale multi-year project to solve an individual problem. And so the entry point into Dynamics may be through talent, it may be through field services, it may be through project services, or quite often it's actually through just using, XRM, the underlying platform to solve a bespoke business problem. So I'm finding that the entry point is greater now, more choices to get in.
Yeah, interesting. But so, I've worked in your market in the last 4 years before I went on my world travels. And I just remembered, particularly with your government in that area, is that they had very much an aversion to anything cloud. So are you seeing that type of change away from in the market where traditionally businesses wanted to be fully on-premise, control the technology in-house to moving to the cloud?
Frankly, I don't actually even face that problem nowadays. I've heard anecdotally that some organisations are still quite reticent, but I think Microsoft has done an exceptional job of just cracking those nuts on the behalf of partners. So they've fought really, really hard to deal with the legal, the compliance. Obviously, they brought data centres to Australia, all of those types of things. And now it's a case of, well, it's a case of, tell me why not, as opposed to tell me why.
Yeah, so good, so good. And so what about in the commercial side? Are you seeing still a requirement to be on-premise much at all, or is it pretty much gone?
It's pretty much gone. I think the only ones I've come across is where ownership is based out of Singapore or Japan or something along those lines, where they tend to be a little bit more protective of IP and a little bit more wary, but generally not.
Yeah, so interesting. So what have you found to be the typical time frame to sell Dynamics from, let's say, you find a potential prospect or a lead and going through to a signed contract? What's a typical window from that point of view?
Oh, I'd have to say it's anywhere between 6 and 18 months, depending on obviously, how big an investment it is. So are you trying to convince an organization to adopt things platform wide? So, ERP, CRM, Office 365, Azure, all the rest of it. And in which case it's obviously a much, much bigger sale. And it also depends on where the customer is at in their understanding of the technology. So are they already certain that it's going to be a dynamic solution? If they are, then obviously the gap is a lot smaller. But if you're going into an organization where they say, oh, well, tell me about this dynamics thing, then there's a lot of education to do before you even get to the point of talking about the solution.
Yeah, interesting. So just to digress there slightly, is that you mentioned that if an organization already has, basically set their mind potentially on Dynamics, are you finding that, our biggest competitor obviously is Salesforce in the market? Are you finding customers are coming to you with absolutely zero understanding or experience of Dynamics, and therefore you're, selling the possibility of what it could do for the organization, or are you finding the customers much more educated these days?
I'm finding that they're more educated, but I still do think that there's an education exercise. We do a lot of work in just the pure XRM space, so using CRM or customer engagement, whatever it's now called, just as an engine to automate any business process. And a lot of customers don't understand that it can do that. The marketing material from Microsoft, if you go hit their website, does not, I don't think, tell a really good story about its ability to be that underlying platform. So it depends on what they're using it for. But I think what I have come to realize is that most customers go, okay, we know this is going to be either a Salesforce or Dynamics solution. It's like tell us more. I'm finding that a lot more.
Yeah. So are you finding, or how are you finding the market? Are they optimistic? Are you seeing an upswing in Dynamics CRM sales or Dynamics 365 sales in the last couple of years, or is it plateaued? What are you feeling?
I feel like it's definitely increasing. I feel like the tide has turned in people seeing Dynamics as a sound competitor to Salesforce, particularly in that obviously the sales and marketing space. But I think where it's getting its most traction is in that XRM space, because I don't really think that there's a competitor on the market that has the same value proposition around that rapid application development niche area.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so true. So can you think of a customer? Let's call them whatever name you want, but that can give us a bit of a process that you would go through. What does a sales engagement journey look like? So, kind of asking this question for those that are perhaps new to selling Dynamics and they want to understand what's a typical, what are the steps as a salesperson you would take to engage over that 6 to 18 month period.
Yep. So there's an awful lot of books and guides and methodologies and all the rest of it, and I've probably got 3 chapters into all of them. I think largely, it starts with qualification. It's just about meeting with as many people and asking enough questions to know that it's something that you want your company, in my instance, Empire, to actually throw its weight behind. Because a lot of companies can shoot from the hip and go for everything, and as soon as somebody says I've got a problem, then all of a sudden everyone thinks it's going to be $1 million opportunity. I think that I spend a lot of time up front just making sure it's real and making sure that all the ingredients and the hygiene is right for the customer to actually do something. I'm lucky in the sense that because I've got that 14-year consulting background, I can kind of already visualize what the solution is going to be. Although I would never take on the role of pre-sales or estimating or anything like that nowadays. I can, anybody who's in sales nowadays really needs to understand the technology, because that will allow you to get the most out of your pre-sales team and your business, because you can describe the solution and also be part of architecting the solution. And also you want to be to your customer, you want to be an educator, you want to teach them something they don't know, bring some new ideas, then they'll see a lot of value in their interactions with you.
Yeah. So what else? Tell me a bit more about that journey of that, as in even down to a week by week or day to day engagement that you would have.
Well, like I said, your coffees, lunches, all the rest of it. We run roundtables and things like that. So if I can see a cluster of opportunities in a similar area, then we might decide to run a briefing or a roundtable, get customers to tell a story, present those types of things. Ultimately, it's leading to the point where we can get the right people in a room to showcase the solution, tied directly back to the challenge that they're trying to solve. I think demos are incredibly important. It's what obviously, I guess solidifies all of the sales that you've been doing verbally up until that point. I guess then, once I also want to start talking to the customer about indicative investment, so that they can say, yep, that's what we expect, or yep, let me go to my manager, let me go to the board, let's see whether we can, make that investment. And then for me, right at the end of the tunnel is then proposal, estimating, scope, because largely I think that should be just a rubber stamp of everything that's happened prior.
Yeah. So how much as a salesperson are you involved in those last phases? So for example, are you writing the proposal, the estimation, and defining the scope, or are there other players within your team that fit those roles?
Yeah, no, I'm not allowed to do that. So at Empire, we've got architects and solution specialists who are dedicated to that, and obviously project managers as well. So a bid team is usually made up of one or more solution specialists and a project manager. My role in that is to effectively top and tail it with executive summary, objectives and those types of things, and to Client executives at Empire also play a pretty heavy role in making sure that it goes through all the approvals at Empire before it goes out the door. So yeah, that's effectively how it's sort of split up.
Yeah. And one thing, once again, just slightly to digress here, I just would like to know Dynamics Days, or what you call convergence now, which is something very specific or unique to Empire and Intergen for that matter in New Zealand. I've been to these days and they're just fantastic events to really educate potential customers on the power of, the Microsoft suite, particularly in the Dynamics area. How have you been involved in these? How effective do you find them in engaging your customers and educating your customers?
Yeah, I think they're excellent. I think it serves as an excellent, like from Empire's perspective, thinking selfishly, it's an excellent brand awareness. It has very high profile within Microsoft and all the rest of it. From a customer standpoint, I think what I've experienced, I've been involved in two in Adelaide. In both of those, I've compared the customer Q&A session, which is at the end, and it's always the section that customers find the most enjoyable because they're hearing from customers. It's a live Q&A. They want to hear from people who've got the war stories and have had the successes. So that's where I think customers get the majority out is hearing other stories and mapping it back to what they're trying to achieve as well.
Mm-hmm. So what about inviting customers to other type of events? So for example, when Convergence, the Microsoft Convergence used to be run in the US, it used to be, I was working in New Zealand at that time, and basically we had a success rate of that if you took customers, and I think one year I took 6 customers along, and each one of them came back and purchased quite a few more licenses, rolled the technology into larger parts of the organization because they were basically meeting their peers, at that event and seeing how other organizations, there was a lot of cross-pollination. Do you see the value of that now, now that, Convergence, that Microsoft run has disappeared? Or are there other events that you think to take a customer along to that are not specifically run by your organization?
Locally, the user groups are excellent. I always encourage, so when I send out invitations to the user groups, the Dynamics user group locally, it'll be publish it out on LinkedIn, but also I have my own personal distribution list to get, to say to people, hey, look, the next one's on, here's the topic, you should come along. And if I can personalize it, so if I know that a particular customer is trying to address a problem, then I'll personalize it to them if I know it's directly relevant. Flying customers around and all the rest of it obviously comes at a cost. So it has to be very selective. I haven't actually ever done that before. But, I know that Microsoft has its, for example, its retail experience center and things like that in the US that are there for that reason. I've just never had a need to do that.
Yeah. To clarify, I never flew them anywhere. What I'd do is I'd pay half their conference ticket. Microsoft would pay the other half. Right. And then the customer would work, you would basically fund the cost to getting to the event. And I found it very, very effective, as in most companies can justify that, and also doesn't move into the bounds of kind of coercion, because they're actually paying for it. Particularly if you're taking government clientele, there's no way that you could fund that. But to get them, invited to the event, make them aware of it was incredibly powerful. Often, one of the ways of doing that was to get them a speaking slot at the event to tell them, to talk about what they had done was very effective. So just moving on, how much do you stay involved with the customer post-sale? So the project is in your delivery mode, your project teams are in place. What's your kind of, do you take a fully hands-off from that point of view and only put out fires should they arise, or are you fully engaged right through to, popping the bottle of champagne, taking them out to lunch at go live?
Look, I'm in through delivery. I'm involved, particularly in the larger projects where there's we'll establish a formal governance process where there's a steerco and different things like that. So I'm absolutely involved in that. Ideally, what we have is we have a project team that is, self-run. I don't think a salesperson should be getting involved too much in delivery. I think it shows a failing of the organization if a salesperson is constantly having to flow in and out to solve problems. And fortunately, we don't have that, particularly here in Adelaide. So I'm lucky with that. Post project go live, I guess what I aim to position for customers before the project starts is a managed service. So Empired is largely split down the middle. We've got one area which is transformation services, which is all about the projects. And we've got another area which is lifecycle services, which many may know of as managed services. So generally, I will position that and have a transition into a managed service offering from the beginning, so it doesn't become this scramble conversation at the end that people forgot to budget for and all the rest of it. I guess what's interesting though is I'm finding more and more that the traditional managed service, which is largely about sort of run and maintain, is no longer suitable to customers who have a changing environment, particularly where it's cloud, it's evergreen, and they're using that asset, that digital asset, to drive their business, which means it needs to be changing regularly. So we're positioning and currently have a number of customers in just a continuous delivery model, which is effectively support delivered out of our transformation services team. It doesn't flick out the back door to a different support team. It's just a continued evolution of whatever platform has been established.
Yeah. So is that team then, once it's in that mode, if you like, are they identifying new potential project work that could come out of that? And then does that come back to you to facilitate the engagement around that through to another outcome?
Yeah, well, I guess this is where the meshing of the business and IT, if you like, becomes so important, because in my mind, every new business initiative should have a technology element associated with it, whether it's the primary element or whether it's just a supporting element to make sure that thing is most efficient. So the way I would see that working is from executives and senior managers having regular discussions with some sort of technology transformation office and saying, here is what we want to achieve. And then that funneling through to individual work packages, which generally gets delivered in an agile methodology. And it's just a continual cycle of discussion through to funneling it into a backlog, through to costing it up, funding it, and delivering it. My role in that is, again, it's, I'm not somebody who can do that day in, day out. I want our PMs, our architects, our Scrum Masters and all that sort of stuff to be doing that for a customer. So generally, I'll advocate for a team to be taking care of that for each customer.
Brilliant. So tell me who are the typical stakeholders you see on the client side, as in during the sales process?
So you'd obviously have, I think it's the business owner joined at the hip with the CIO. If you can get that working, then you generally you're onto a good thing. So yeah, it's that executive level. It doesn't matter whether it's obviously, it's in marketing or if it's in HR or if it's in operations or whatever it might be. There has to be somebody obviously sponsoring the initiative, and they have to be, ideally joined at the hip with the CIO so that everybody's moving in the same direction.
Yeah. So do you come across many where it's purchased by committee?
Yes. Yeah, there's on the bigger projects, there's usually a project board of some kind or steering committee of some kind where they've brought a few people, SMEs, together to make the decision collectively. So obviously, it's really important again to find out what's driving people, what's motivating people, and at the end of the day, it's a process of selling to people. People buy from people, and so you really have to make sure you're across that.
Yeah, so true. So what about from your side? What are the roles that you're typically involved in the pursuit of a Dynamics sale?
Qualification. I see qualification as being my primary role. If I can get that right, then everything else flows from there. I enjoy getting quite involved in what solution is being put forward. It's just, I guess it's just passion. It's the nerd in me that I can't help but get involved in that. It gets me excited. Although I don't make the ultimate decision. And then obviously it's all to do with then closing. There's opening, then there's developing, and there's closing. My role is in opening and closing, and a little bit in developing.
Right. So what about the other team members that would assist you in the sales? So you mentioned before about the project manager and an architect and actually coming up with the solution, but are there any other roles you'd bring in from your organization as part of getting to that point that you start to lock down a formal list of requirements and start pricing against it?
I often use the executives at Empire as a means to strike up a conversation and certainly tell stories about how we've achieved similar things, obviously nationally and internationally. So that's something that I'll use selectively. But primarily it's the people I mentioned before. It's the architects who sit across the entire Microsoft stack. Then there's the solution specialists who are dedicated to particular areas of the stack. I think where it gets quite interesting and something I'm learning quite rapidly is that when you get down to the ERP space, so Dynamics for Operations, then all of a sudden you break out into a second level, which is that you have your finance people, you have your procurement and sourcing and logistics people, you have your manufacturing people, and so the team gets quite large. Your bid team gets quite large, particularly when you're looking at that ERP space.
Yeah, so true, so true. So what part do then RFX or RFP, RFIs, etc. play in your sales process?
Hopefully none.
That would be a perfect world, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah. Anything beginning with RF, I think, is generally my experience is that it doesn't lead to the right decision for a customer. I feel like it's kind of like buying a house. It's going to be your biggest investment decision of your life, and you're afforded the opportunity to go to 2, maybe 3, 4, open inspections, a building inspection, which is questionable in the value that you get,
Yeah.
a pest inspection, and then all of a sudden you're deciding to pay $500,000 to $1 million. And I find that's often that's the experience for me with RFPs as well, particularly the closed ones where it's must only speak to this person, every conversation must be via email. It doesn't lead to the right decision, the choice. I genuinely believe that. So ideally, I'd only take part in that process if I knew that we were the front runner.
Yeah. So true. It's an interesting process, and it hasn't really changed much over time. So can you tell me a bit about Hunky Bannister? What's the story there?
I'm really surprised that you found that. Actually, that was back in the days when I had way too much time on my hands. So yeah, that was a little home movie that some of my mates made that you've probably found on YouTube.
I did, and I'll make sure I link it in the show notes so everybody can have a little watch of that and get to know you a bit better.
Funnily enough, the name actually came from I forget how old I was when I made that, so I've got to be careful that my parents aren't listening. But I picked up a whiskey glass in my parents' bar, and it had Hanky Bannister on it. So I presume it's a Scotch or Irish whiskey called Hanky Bannister out there somewhere. And that was the name of my character. So there you go.
Classic. So moving back to Dynamics, how do you handle lead generation?
Lead generation is, a lot of it is referral based or repeat business. I've been in I've been in the industry for a long time. I've been in sales, particularly for 5 years. So I've built up some pretty good relationships. Lead gen is not something that I have to focus on much. Empire's marketing team, through the website and through various EDMs and events and all the rest of it, does actually generate a lot of leads. We'd probably get sort of 2 to 5 a week, cold calls to us that we'll follow up on. But generally, it's just about really getting to know, sort of between 3 and 5 customers exceptionally well, and just continuing to be a partner for them. That's what I find successful.
Really good. So what's your process around pre-sales?
So pre-sales is, for me, it's, the role of pre-sales is in presentations, demonstrations, proposals, estimating, those core elements. I would expect whoever is my lead on the bid to meet with the customer, multiple times, just so they can get a feel for the culture and everything between the lines, so to speak. There's obviously, Empire does a lot more than just Dynamics. We've got a big data insights practice, a big digital experience design practice, a infrastructure managed service practice. So there's a lot of those sort of areas that I'm not a scholar in. So I will bring pre-sales in a lot earlier on those opportunities. Whereas with Dynamics, because I kind of know it, back to front, I'm able to take on a lot of the beginning of the sales cycle before I have to bring in somebody from a pre-sales perspective.
Yeah. So The role of the pre-sales as an and demoing, how important is the demo of the technology and mapping that to the customer's vision of the future?
I think it's critical. I really, really do think it's critical. It's, you want the customer to leave going, I know how that's going to be implemented inside of my organization. So, I see the demo as an opportunity to not just showcase the technology, but also to showcase the professionalism of Empire and how we've understood what they've needed and put time and effort into putting that presentation together.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Tell me, what are three things that management or senior management can do to really enable salespeople to do their role better?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that I'm talking from a personal perspective at the moment. Really, really need to ensure that your company's brand and messaging is clear so that even before you start talking to somebody or as you start talking to somebody, the very first thing they're going to do is go, who's Empire? And do some research and that's they're educating themselves before they even speak to you. So that's key. I think being selective on vertical and horizontal go-to-markets and backing that up with really strong campaigns and collateral and different things like that is really important. So it's not just go after everything that moves. And the other thing is there's so many stories that are known to only the people in the region where that project was delivered. Empire is a 1100 plus organisation operating primarily across Australia and New Zealand, but we've got a 50-person team in the US that does work for Microsoft, which is incredible stories. And so making sure that those stories are known, the successes are known, is really valuable because that's what my customers want to hear locally. So that would be one of the things I think that would help things quite a lot.
Yeah. And so is there anything around the sales structure of the organization that you'd want to add to that?
I think access to pre-sales is a key one. So it's a fight. It's always a fight for the best people at the right time. And always customers want things at short notice and different things like that. So just, formalizing that access to pre-sales and making sure that it really is a dedicated commitment to you and the deal that you're trying to win, I think is really important.
Excellent. So can you tell me a bit about your experience of dealing with different customer profiles? For example, government as opposed to not-for-profit, as opposed to the, commercial customer profile, if you like.
I think that if I was to say the thing that is similar is this whole concept of customer experience is just pervasive now across every industry. But the nuances then differ depending on the type of customer you're talking to. So from a government perspective, customer experience is all about making government easy to deal with, seamless experiences, hassle-free, et cetera, Although I do find often that still the majority of government-based projects are largely compliance-driven. So there's a lot less of that, true rah-rah, we're going to improve citizen engagement. And it's a lot more about, we just have to remove this paper or we just have to automate this process or something along those lines. From a not-for-profit perspective, what I'm finding, particularly in aged care and also in the charity space. So if we pick aged care, for example, changing funding models, consumer-directed care, living longer, living better, all these government initiatives are upending that industry to the point where they no longer have a steady stream of income anymore, regardless of how well they perform. It's actually being turned on its head to be, you need to compete, you need to do a really good job, because the customers have the choice now. So that is totally changing those industries. Injection of new blood from the commercial sector is joining that industry to try and introduce, the concepts of customer acquisition, cross-sell, stopping churn and all the rest of it. And that's a massive transition because those organizations have largely ignored technology for 10 or 15 years. So they're going through a massive uplift. The other one is not-for-profit. Fundraising. So we do a lot of work in that space, and it's all about moving away from the what they call the chugging game, the charity mugging, and using digital appropriately to entice people to donate to a cause. So that's a really interesting sector. Commercial is commercial, right? It's for me, the fundamentals are the same. It's about, acquiring more customers, bettering your bottom line. But the motivation behind improving that digital experience for the customer is has never been greater.
Yeah, very good, very good. So, what do you do personally to stay on the cutting edge as a salesperson? Sales is an ever evolving game. How do you make sure that you maintain your skills as an individual?
I think that the skills, the actual sales skills itself, I think is just learn by failure and mistakes and things like that. If you're just constantly putting yourself out there, and then you'll learn. I don't see the need to read books or anything along those lines to learn about the sales journey or anything like that. I do have a favorite go-to sales blog though. That's by a guy called it's called the Sales Blog by a guy called Anthony Iniero. Probably pronounced that wrong, but it's just gold. It's just little daily updates, which are just reminders of what you should be focusing on and how you should be behaving and what's important and things like that. I think that staying on the edge of the technology is an interesting one, because Microsoft has obviously moved, to the cloud well and truly. Their evergreen environments, the release cycles are much shorter. Then I've gotten into the sort of, I guess, the mode of like micro learning, like learning what's changed just through reading blogs, through LinkedIn, through just reading as much as you can, because there's no longer a case of I'm going to go and learn about Dynamics 2011 and know that it's going to be accurate until the next version is released in 2 years' time. It just changes every day. So learning patterns have had to evolve around that.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because that leads into that next question I had, which is around staying up to date with the massive amount of change. Twice a year we're getting releases from Dynamics or from Microsoft with Dynamics 365 back in 2011, when it was 2011, or CRM 4.3, that type of thing. We're dealing with once every 3-year cadence, and you could put a bigger upfront investment in learning the technology, and then it would, give you 3 years of payback. Nowadays, with that massive change, are you setting aside specific time to keep abreast of that, or is it just naturally as part of your daily process? You're reading those blogs and staying up to date with what Microsoft's publishing.
Yeah, so probably this answers one of the questions a little bit further down about what's my daily routine. I'm fortunate in the fact that we have really good public transport in Adelaide. I spend half an hour on the train in the morning and half an hour in the afternoon, and I use that time to scan and speed read a lot of things, whether it be roadmap.dynamics.com, whether it be the Office 365 roadmap, which is incredibly informative, whether it be the Dynamics blog, looking at what people are saying there, trawling through LinkedIn. I'm pretty sure that LinkedIn has profiled me really, really well and serves me up information that's relevant. So yeah, that's sort of what I do.
Excellent. So what are the skills you think to be you need to be successful in selling Dynamics? So if people are listening to the podcast and go, what are the 3 things skills I need to develop? What would you advise them?
I think it's just important, as a differentiator of Dynamics, understand how it fits into the wider Microsoft stack. So how it fits into Office 365, how it integrates with Power BI, what the common data model is, how it integrates with Flow, how you can use Power Apps. All of these types of things are, if you know and understand that ecosystem, you can tell a much better story. So that would be one of my lessons.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. What about events? As a salesperson, are there any events that you really like to attend, to have on your schedule, that you feel allows your personal development from a sales perspective?
Well, I mentioned the Dynamics user group before. I find that really good, because I was a committee member for a couple of years. It changes every year, so I'm not on there any longer. But in terms, I go along to that. I love to see the types of customers there, hear their questions, And obviously you don't solicit business at those types of events, but it just keeps me in touch with that. We are also, as Empire, part of AIIA. There's Australia Israel Chamber of Commerce that runs various events that I get invited along to. Australia America Chamber of Commerce. Those are really fascinating because they often have really good speakers from a business perspective. And I find that fascinating because it reminds me that technology is being thought about all the way up to the top of every organization, but spoken about in a different way. So I find those quite useful as well.
Excellent. It's interesting that you've mentioned, apart from the user group, other, if you like, professional organizations that are well outside, if you like, your core business that you're getting a lot of benefit from as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. Can you tell me a bit about your Microsoft relationship, or what you see works well as a Microsoft partnership and relationship to how you progress a sale?
Oh my God, you've got to have a PhD to know how Microsoft works sometimes. It's incredible, and it's just changed again, in the last 6 months or so. So yeah, I think that Microsoft now generally all of the Adelaide accounts, apart from a few, are now managed by a telesales team, which is actually out of Sydney. So it's about knowing who's part of that team, knowing the account executive, the business development manager, knowing who is focused on your industry and your customer, and speaking to them as often as you can. Because as a partner, you have to sell to Microsoft as much as you sell to your customers. Microsoft needs to know what you're doing, because if you're not telling them, they've got no idea. So it's the squeaky wheel gets the oil. I don't think we do it as well as what we could, but that's one thing I've learned. And the next level below is all the technology specialists, the TSPs and the ATSs and all this sort of stuff, which I generally don't have a very formal relationship with them. It's when needed. However, I'm beginning to realise that they are probably key to a lot of customers. So yeah, it's always something that I should be doing better, but I've heard that we do it pretty well. So you can't complain.
Yeah. If you could describe the perfect relationship with Microsoft and you could create how you'd like that to operate, what would it look like?
I think what we should be doing at Empire, and I know it's being thought about and being fleshed out, is basically a map, a relationship map. So, as a client executive, who should my relationships be with? As a architect, who should my relationships be with? And actually map those out and formalize them. That's what I think should be done. But obviously, we're a big organization. Microsoft is a bigger organization. Everybody gets busy, so that it's something that is as a work in progress.
Yeah, totally. So just one final question here before we get on to some quick fires. What are your thoughts on sales in the future when it comes to Dynamics? What changes do if you have a crystal ball, what are you seeing?
I think that more and more so customers are going to be educated before they talk to you. So you have to have a point of difference, and whether that be you become an ISV, which for people who don't know is independent software vendor. So you have a solution that's built on top of the stack that no others do, or you have a particular focus on an industry that sets you apart from the rest. I think the days of generalist SIs are starting to disappear, and you really need to focus and hone in on what you're good at.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, some quick fire questions to end with. What books, blogs, or podcasts do you recommend most to people, and why?
Books are a luxury for me nowadays, although I still think the best book I ever read was Scar Tissue, which was the story of the lead singer of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Podcasts, there's two that I absolutely love, and I've completely exhausted them, is Masters of Scale is one of them, and the other one is Dot Future, which is a Microsoft podcast.
Future?
Yeah, both amazing.
Excellent. Yeah, I definitely listen to Masters of Scale myself, and I'll be checking out Dot Future. What are your favourite apps and why?
Shamefully, I spend far too much time on LinkedIn. It's really it's my go-to when I've got 5 minutes to spare. I just love trawling around and looking what people are doing and looking what people are sharing and things like that. So, bit shameful, not very exciting for your audience, but that's it.
That's all good. It's all good. Do you have a daily ritual that sets you on the right path for a successful day?
Yep. Get up early. get to work early, get home early, and spend as much time with the kids. That's my routine. So I like being in the office, an hour and a half before everybody else, because it allows me to knock off my to-do list and lower the anxiety levels, which means that the rest of the day can be really focused on what are my goals for the day.
Excellent. What are your recommendations do you have for people starting out in their Dynamics career?
For sales or
for
just
sales.
Dynamics? Yeah.
For sales, yeah.
I mentioned before, just understand the stack, understand Microsoft's direction, around, sort of that modular-based, app-based model supported by the common data model. If you can understand that and understand the whole ecosystem, then you'll be able to really pitch it well.
Yeah, excellent. If you could redo anything in your career, what would it be?
I wish I'd just had gone and started a business, taken a few more risks in my early days when I didn't have as much responsibility, no mortgage, no kids, all the rest of it. But I think that's going to be something that's perhaps a little bit later in life. Yeah, that'll be my only major regret.
Cool. If you could recommend anyone as a guest for future podcasts, who would you recommend?
Oh, wow. I think I find a really interesting person here in Adelaide is Eva, who is the State Director for Microsoft in Adelaide. I think she's just a really interesting person in terms of the way that she is involved in the community, women in leadership, women in IT, different things like that. I find her actually quite inspiring.
Excellent, fantastic. Brock, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Before you go, if people want to follow you online or get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Well, obviously my LinkedIn profile, you can go there. I'm not really active on things like Twitter and all the rest of it, so LinkedIn would be the main avenue to get in contact with me.
Excellent. This has been a Dynamics 365 podcast focusing on the ingredients of a successful Dynamics 365 practice. Your host was Business Solution MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as NZ365 Guy. For more information on this interview, show notes, feedback and resources mentioned, or if you know someone who would be a great guest for future episodes, please go to nz365guy.com/podcast. Also, check out the other great Dynamics 365 podcasts on CRM Audio, like the following.
Hi Matt, how are you?
Great, Britta. How about you?
I'm looking forward to our next chance to talk about Dynamics 365.
Oh, you mean Implement This, where we spend 20 to 30 minutes discussing how to implement this or that inside of Dynamics?
Exactly, but where did the topics come from?
From listeners, or projects we've been working on, or conversations we've had recently.
Let's stop recording this promo and do an episode right now.
Sounds good. And if you're interested, you can submit a question and hear answers to others at implementthis.org or at crm.audio.